So in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, you have the actual case and what's happening there, and then you have how this will be interpreted by the country. What are we as a society going to take away from this? What are we gonna learn, if anything? Well, the right is pretty clear on what they want you to think about vigilantes like Kyle Rittenhouse. Here is Jeanine Pirro. She seems maybe a little bit biased.
You've got a young guy who was a new CPR. He was a police explorer. He was some kind of fireman cadet. He was a good kid. He went there to clean up the graffiti on the buildings. The bottom line here is that this kid has established that when he shot Rosenbaum, the first victim, he was in fear for his own life. When he shot the second guy, Huber, he was in fear legitimately and reasonably of his own life. And when he shot Grosskreis, the third guy who didn't die, for which he's being charged with attempted murder, he had legitimate grounds for which to use deadly physical force.
Exactly. I mean, he's just a good kid. He's like a lifeguard. Like, for instance, if he sees that someone is drowning, he'll do a few warning shots in the air. And if he sees any graffiti, what's the easiest way to get graffiti out? Well, if you shoot the wall to bits, the graffiti won't be there anymore. So you just tear up the wall and get all the graffiti off there. And he's a good kid. He also killed several people and doesn't really seem to have learned anything from that. But Charles, so right off the bat, there's like very little acknowledgement, if any, that he broke multiple laws. Whether he in the end gets to say this was self-defense, he broke multiple laws. They don't care about that. It's perfectly fine. His motivations can't be impeached. He was just there to help. And by the way, he proved that he was in fear of his life. This vague thing that can't be proven, a prior psychology of a person. I would love to ask, so when he raised his gun to shoot Rosenbaum, if Rosenbaum had been holding a gun and had shot Kyle Rittenhouse, presumably Rosenbaum was doing self-defense. And if any of the others had successfully shot him, presumably they were doing self-defense. Or if an onlooker saw him gunning down people that successfully shot him, they can prove that they were doing it for self-defense because a guy with an AR-15 was literally going around killing multiple people. But we've talked about self-defense. Now it's the right cannot even acknowledge legitimate concerns about whether he should have been there, why he brought an illegal gun in the first place. It's just, he's a good kid. And I assume they will always address kids regardless of race. It's just, they're just good kids, Why are you being so hard on them?
Yeah, so in a way that most people might not understand, Jeanine Pirro's comments and approach is extremely problematic and deeply, deeply triggering. And I know that we are sort of having this conversation about Kyle Rittenhouse, but I talked about the politics of identity earlier, but this strikes at the heart of it. What we know statistically, because it's been proven, is that Black and Latino males in America are oftentimes viewed and assessed in the teenage years between 1.5 and as many as 3 years older than they are. That leads to a very different type of interaction with law enforcement. It leads to a very different type of treatment in schools, and it leads to a very different type of assessment in the courtroom when they are sentenced for crimes. And so what Jeanine Pirro did was essentially show you how that works in action. Let me sort of remind viewers of something about that network, about that ideology, and about those political leanings. Trayvon Martin was 17 years old when he was killed by George Zimmerman. He was a 17-year-old teenage male. When he was 17 and he was killed, and George Zimmerman was on trial, and George Zimmerman was the one who was facing charges, the conversation was about, should Trayvon Martin have had on a hoodie? Had Trayvon Martin smoked marijuana? Was Trayvon Martin wrong for having used racial epithets to describe white people? These were the conversations in different attempts. They talked about Trayvon Martin's grades in order to criminalize Trayvon Martin. Now, no one is talking about the fact that Jeanine Pirro seems to conveniently leave out the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse was walking around in a bar at 17 years of age, which is legal if you're with an adult. He was 18 at the time, which is legal if you're with an adult in his part of the country, with a shirt that said "free as you know what." She's not talking about that. She's not talking about the fact that there was testimony and evidence that did not come in about Kyle Rittenhouse's history in terms of beating up young women.
Yep.
And violence there. Yet there is this almost angelic picture of him painted as this damn near Boy Scout. He was training as an EMT in a fire. Not he lied on the stand. Not he was in illegal possession of a firearm. And Pirro is someone who can be called to task for this because she is a judge and knows better.
That's crazy that she's a judge.
And so the idea that this has taken place and that this is the narrative, it's not a new one. It's not something that we haven't seen before. However, it is insulting and deeply, deeply triggering.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.